Melania Trump, resplendent in her signature elegance, stepped through the bustling airport terminal, gliding effortlessly past the throngs of travelers. Her dark sunglasses, paired with a sleek black designer dress, made her an unmistakable figure, and she felt the familiar hush that followed her as she moved through the crowd. Today's destination was a luxury retreat in the Mediterranean, a few days of peaceful indulgence and quiet relaxation. But as she made her way toward the check-in counter, her calm and poised demeanor was about to be shattered by an encounter she never could have predicted. The young airline employee behind the counter, who had clearly not yet learned the fine art of composure in the presence of international icons, looked up with wide eyes. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can I assist you today?" Melania smiled politely, the warmth of her expression as serene as ever. "I'm on the flight to Nice, first class." The employee quickly typed into the system, but after a few seconds, a strange look crossed his face. He glanced up at her, his fingers tapping nervously on the keyboard. "I'm afraid there's a bit of an issue, ma'am," he said, voice trembling slightly. "There's no first-class seat available for you. It looks like there's been a mistake with your booking, and the first-class cabin is fully booked." Melania's lips parted in mild surprise, but her poise never faltered. "I have a first-class ticket," she replied smoothly, her tone carrying just the right hint of authority. "There must be a mistake." The employee shuffled through papers frantically, his movements becoming more frantic by the second. "I understand, ma'am. I'm terribly sorry for the inconvenience, but as the system is showing, there's no available first-class seat at the moment. Would you be willing to accept a business-class seat, or perhaps a later flight?" Melania raised an eyebrow, her expression unwavering, though there was a flash of irritation behind her eyes. She knew the power of a booking. First-class tickets were a privilege that didn't come easily, especially not for her, and she certainly wasn't used to being told her seat was unavailable. "Business class?" she repeated slowly, a glint of disbelief in her voice. "I don't think so. I want my first-class seat." The employee looked at her helplessly. "I'm afraid, ma'am, that's all we have for you. Would you prefer to be refunded?" "No," Melania said firmly. "I won't be refunded. I've made a reservation for first class, and that's what I expect." Seeing that the situation wasn't improving, the employee, clearly over his head, reluctantly called for a manager. As he dialed, Melania's patience was beginning to wear thin, but her regal composure remained intact. She glanced around, noticing the increasing number of curious onlookers who were beginning to whisper and stare. It was clear to her that this wasn't just a simple booking error, it was something more. Something that, for reasons unknown, felt like an intentional misstep. The manager arrived shortly, a middle-aged man in a sharply pressed uniform. His face betrayed a slight anxiety as he addressed her, his words formal, but his eyes wide with nerves. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I understand there's been an issue with your seat," he asked, his voice a bit too rehearsed. Melania regarded him silently for a moment before responding with calm precision. "Yes, I was told there's no first-class seat available, but I'm quite certain I booked one. Could you explain why that is?" The manager checked the system and hesitated for a few moments, clearly at a loss for how to explain the growing issue. "There appears to be an error in the system, ma'am. Your seat was not processed correctly. We can certainly offer you a seat in business class, but first class is simply unavailable at the moment." Melania's gaze remained steady, her silence both calculating and measured. "So, you're telling me that someone, perhaps someone on your end, has made a mistake. This isn't simply a system error, is it?" The manager froze for a brief moment, as if caught off guard by her astute observation. Then, with a hasty smile, he replied, "I assure you, ma'am, that's not the case at all. It's a rare technical glitch. I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience." Melania's lips parted, preparing to demand a higher level of intervention, when suddenly a familiar, powerful voice echoed from behind her. "Is there a problem here?" She turned around, and there he was, Donald Trump, her husband, impossibly tall, unmistakably confident, and impeccably dressed in a navy suit. His very presence seemed to command the attention of everyone around them. The manager's face went white as he turned to greet the man who had just walked in. There was a moment of stunned silence before the manager quickly straightened his posture, realizing exactly who stood before him. "Mr. Trump, sir, we, um, didn't realize you were here. We're terribly sorry about this mix-up," the manager stammered, his voice now laced with panic. Donald turned his gaze to Melania, a playful smirk crossing his lips. "What's going on here, darling?" Melania, her eyes no longer masking the mild irritation she felt, responded calmly. "Apparently there's no first-class seat available for me. They're trying to offer me business class." Donald raised an eyebrow and turned his full attention to the manager. "Business class? For my wife? I think you need to check again. First-class seats aren't a suggestion. They're a requirement. Do you understand who owns this airline?" The manager's face turned a shade of crimson as realization dawned upon him. "Of course, sir. I had no idea this was your flight. I'm so terribly sorry for the misunderstanding. We'll get everything sorted immediately." Donald turned back to Melania, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Let's get you to the right seat. This is ridiculous." Melania, for the first time since arriving at the counter, allowed a small, knowing smile to grace her lips. She knew her husband's influence and power like the back of her hand. She didn't need to be reminded of his control over vast empires, but it was always amusing to watch the world squirm when faced with that reality. The manager, now visibly shaking, led them to a private lounge. Once seated in their luxurious first-class cabin, the issue was swiftly resolved. No one dared question the Trump family's position any longer. As they relaxed in their seats, Melania turned to Donald, her expression softening. "I didn't realize your airline needed such a reminder of who's in charge," she said, a teasing lilt in her voice. Donald chuckled. "Well, sometimes people forget, but they won't anymore. Now let's enjoy the flight." Melania leaned back in her seat, her mind already drifting to the beautiful retreat awaiting them. The incident had been an amusing distraction, but with Donald at the helm, she knew that nothing, especially not something as trivial as a seat on an airplane, would ever stand in their way. And with that, the plane took off, soaring into the sky as Melania settled into the luxury she had rightfully earned, knowing that the world would always bend to the Trump legacy. As the plane ascended into the cloud-speckled sky, Melania and Donald relaxed into the plush leather seats of the first-class cabin, the hum of the jet engines providing a soothing backdrop to the events that had just unfolded. Melania absent-mindedly ran her fingers over the smooth fabric of the armrest, her mind still running through the bizarre encounter at the airport. "Do you think they do this often?" Melania asked, her voice soft but tinged with amusement, turning toward Donald. "Make people feel like they don't belong in first class?" Donald chuckled, leaning back in his seat and adjusting his seatbelt. "Oh, believe me, darling, it happens more than you think. But with me on board, it'll be a long time before anyone forgets who runs this place." Melania smiled, but there was something more to her expression, a glimmer of thoughtfulness in her eyes. "It's strange how some people are so quick to assume things. They saw me standing there and thought I was just another passenger. And then, when they realized who I was, the fear kicked in." "Fear can be a powerful motivator," Donald replied, his voice turning slightly more serious. "But so can loyalty. You just have to make sure the right people know who's in charge. And if they forget, well, a little reminder never hurts." Melania nodded, looking out of the window, watching the sprawling world below as the plane cut through the air. She had long known the power of her husband's name, the way it commanded respect and attention in every room, every meeting, and yes, even in the skies. Yet in that brief moment of tension at the airport, she realized that there were still those who underestimated the depth of their reach. As the flight continued, the flight attendants, who had previously appeared tense when first addressing her, now fawned over her with the utmost care, ensuring every detail of her comfort was attended to. Melania couldn't help but notice the stark contrast in the way they treated her now compared to before Donald's arrival. It was almost comical, like watching a play where the script had suddenly changed. "Is everything to your liking, Mrs. Trump?" one of the attendants asked, her voice syrupy sweet as she offered a freshly chilled glass of champagne. Melania glanced at the stewardess with a polite smile. "Everything is perfect, thank you." Her tone was warm, but there was a subtle edge to it, an edge that said, "I know what you're doing." Meanwhile, Donald was busy flipping through some paperwork, checking in on a few business matters that could never be put on hold, even in the air. As always, he was a man of action, a man who couldn't help but stay in control of everything around him, even from 35,000 feet. Melania observed him for a moment, the glow of the overhead lights casting a soft sheen on his face. Despite everything, despite the chaos, the constant media attention, the endless demands, he remained unshakably himself. In that sense, they were alike. She too had learned to keep her composure, to never let the small things get to her. And yet she had to admit, moments like the one at the airport were a reminder of just how human they both were. As the hours passed, the flight attendants offered an exquisite array of meals, and Melania indulged in each course, savoring the rich flavors of the gourmet dishes. Donald was less interested in the food, instead engrossed in a conference call with one of his business partners. But that was Donald, always multitasking, always looking ahead. Just as the plane began its descent toward the Mediterranean, the attendant returned with a tablet in hand, offering a soft smile. "Mrs. Trump, sir, the resort has confirmed your arrival. Your private villa has been prepared, and everything is in place for your stay. The staff will be ready to assist you as soon as you land." Melania's eyes lit up at the news. The resort had long been a favorite getaway, a place where she could unwind, far from the prying eyes of the world. For a few days, she could pretend to be just a woman enjoying the luxury of the moment, instead of the public figure everyone seemed to have their eyes on. "Thank you," she replied gracefully, her voice calm and collected. "We're looking forward to it." Donald, finally finishing up his call, leaned over with a smile. "You'll love it there, darling. It's perfect for getting away from all the noise. No one will bother us." Melania nodded, but there was a flicker of thought in her eyes. She had always loved the idea of escaping the chaos, even if just for a moment. But the truth was, she knew the world never stopped watching. No matter how far they traveled, no matter how many private jets they flew, their lives would always be under a microscope. Still, it was moments like these, quiet moments spent with her husband in the comfort of their own world, that made it all worth it. As the plane landed with a gentle thud on the tarmac, the golden Mediterranean sun glistening in the distance, Melania and Donald gathered their belongings, ready to disembark. The airport was a private one, far removed from the crowds and paparazzi. It felt like a world unto itself, untouched by the pressures that followed them everywhere else. When they stepped off the plane, they were greeted by an entire team of staff members, all eager to ensure their stay would be flawless. Melania felt a small, satisfied smile curve at the corners of her lips. Despite the minor inconvenience earlier in the day, it had all led to this, a perfect escape. Donald placed a hand gently on her back, guiding her toward the awaiting car. "This is our time, Melania. No more interruptions. Just you, me, and the sea." As they drove toward the villa, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore growing louder, Melania relaxed into her seat. She let the noise of the world fade into the background, knowing that here, in this secluded corner of the world, she could truly unwind. The airport incident was nothing more than a fleeting moment, a minor bump in an otherwise perfect day. But one thing was for certain, Melania Trump never forgot that a little reminder of who was in charge was sometimes all it took to make the world sit up and take notice. And that, she mused, was a power few could ever underestimate.